Imagine this: a fighter jet takes off in Montana, the pilot ejects, and the plane just keeps flying. 4 miles. Landing itself safely in a field. Sounds impossible, right? Well, in 1970 it really happened, and the Air Force called it the Cornfield Bomber. Let me tell you how this unbelievable story went down. The star of our story is a Convair F-106 Delta Dart, America's premier interceptor in the 60s. This was a serious Cold War machine. Supersonic, fast climbing, ready to intercept any Soviet bomber foolish enough to come close. Pilots loved them, engineers adored them, but even the best planes can have accidents. So here's where things go sideways. It's February of 1970. The Cold War is still very much a thing, and this F-106 is out on what's supposed to be a pretty standard training mission over Montana. Nothing exotic, just air combat maneuvering. Basically, practice dogfighting. The kind of stuff that these pilots did all the time. But during one of these maneuvers, the jet suddenly departed from controlled flight and enters a flat spin. And this is one of the worst situations that a pilot can find themselves in. Instead of the nose dropping down and the aircraft spiraling downward, like you might expect, a flat spin is different. The aircraft is stalled. The wings aren't really flying anymore, and the jet is rotating almost level, like a frisbee falling off of a roof. It's not gaining airspeed, control surfaces stop responding the way you want them to, and every second that passes, you're losing altitude with fewer and fewer options. Lieutenant Gary Faust does exactly what he's trained to do. He runs through the checklist. He applies every recovery procedure that he knows. He even deploys the drag chute, which, by the way, is basically the aviation equivalent of yanking the handbrake while doing hundreds of miles an hour. And nothing works. That's the moment when a pilot realizes this might not be recoverable. The altitude is bleeding off, the spin is not stopping, and Faust has to make the decision that no pilot ever wants to make. He bails out. He ejects. And that's usually where stories like this end. The pilot ejects, aircraft impacts terrain at high speed. The Air Force writes off another jet, and everyone moves on. Tragic, but expected. But instead, something very weird happens. Right after Faust ejects, the aircraft suddenly stops spinning. And that's the part we really need to sit with for a second. Flat spins, they don't just stop, especially in jets from this era. In many cases, once you were in one this deep, the outcome was already decided. That's why ejection seats exist in the first place. But the violent rotation damps out, the jet rolls wings level, and the F-106 transitions into a shallow but stable glide. No pilot, no hands on the controls, no autopilot stepping in to save the day. Just physics. Doing something that nobody expected. And here's the key detail that makes all of this possible. Before everything went wrong, Faust had trimmed the aircraft for level flight and pulled the throttle back to idle. That means once the spin stopped, the jet naturally wanted to fly straight and slowly lose altitude. The ejection itself also mattered. Ejecting is not just pulling a handle and floating away. The seat fires upward with explosive force. The canopy either blows off or shatters, and in a split second, hundreds of pounds of pilot and seat are violently removed from the aircraft. That sudden loss of weight shifts the center of gravity just enough to change how the jet behaves. Meanwhile, Faust is descending under his parachute, probably replaying the last few moments of that flight in his head. When one of the other pilots on the mission sees something that makes him stop and stare. The F-106 is still flying, not tumbling, not diving, just cruising along. So he radios Faust and says, completely straight-faced, "You better get back in it," which might be the most Air Force sentence ever spoken. Now, completely on its own, the F-106 glides over rural Montana. No cities, no highways, no dramatic last-second intervention. Just farmland stretching out in every direction. From the Air Force's point of view, the mission is already over. The pilot is safe. The aircraft is presumed lost. No one is expecting to recover anything. No one is dispatching a team thinking they're about to find a mostly intact interceptor, politely sitting in a field. But after several miles, the jet reaches the end of its journey. It touches down in a farmer's frozen field near Big Sandy, Montana. No explosion, no fireball, no twisted wreckage scattered across the countryside. It just lands. The landing gear is still tucked away in the up position, so the belly scrapes along the frozen ground. The aircraft slides to a stop, relatively straight, relatively intact, like it meant to do that all along. When the Air Force recovery team arrives, they're expecting debris. What they find instead is a fighter jet that's honestly in pretty good shape. Minor damage, no fuel fire, engine still largely intact. In fact, one of the officers on the recovery crew was reported saying that if the jet had any less damage, he could have flown it out of that field. And that's the moment that this aircraft stops being just another training mishap. Someone, and no one knows exactly who, gives it the perfect nickname, the Cornfield Bomber. Because how else do you describe a $6 million interceptor casually parking itself in a frozen Montana field? But this didn't just happen because the jet was magical, or autonomous, or secretly smarter than we think. It happened because of design. The F-106 Delta Dart was built as a Cold War interceptor, designed to fly fast, straight, and stable at very high altitudes. It had a big delta wing, excellent natural balance, and flight characteristics that, in this one bizarre edge case, worked perfectly without human in the loop. Delta wings in particular can be incredibly stable at certain angles of attack. And when the pilot in the ejection seat left the aircraft, the center of gravity shifted just enough to let the spin recover. Not because anyone planned it, not because it was in the manual, but because good engineering margins sometimes save you in ways that no checklist ever could. And that's why this story stuck around. In Air Force circles, the Cornfield Bomber became something of legend. The pilots joked about it for years. Engineers, they studied it. It became one of those late night squadron stories that starts with, okay, this sounds fake, but I swear it happened. It's funny, sure. But it also reminds us of something deeper. Aviation is built on layers of redundancy, smart design, and margins for error. Every once in a while, those layers line up in a way that nobody could predict it. A plane that should have been lost wasn't, and a pilot that did everything right walked away. A fighter jet became famous not for what it destroyed, but for landing itself in a field. And that's why the Cornfield Bomber still gets talked about today. Not because it was planned, not because it was repeatable, but because sometimes, even in the most checklist-driven world imaginable, the impossible still happens. I mean, how wild is that? A plane flying itself, touching down like nothing happened, no pilot at the controls, no dramatic last-second save, just systems doing exactly what they were designed to do. And honestly, that's the kind of story that makes aviation history feel alive. Not just dates and specs, but moments where you stop and go, wait, that actually happened? Weird, unexpected, and kind of amazing. If you want more stories like this, the strange ones, the forgotten ones, the stories that sound made up until you dig into them, hit subscribe, because next week we're going to dive into the passenger jet that airlines seriously regretted buying. On paper, it looked like the future. In reality, yeah, it went very wrong. And before you go, tell me in the comments, what's the craziest plane story you've heard of? I'll read every single one, and who knows, a future episode might be inspired by your comment.